Well, good morning, everyone. We're certainly glad to have you either live today or on demand recorded later to look at the first webinar in the 2018 webinar series for the Virginia Association of Independent Schools. And we're going to be focusing on helping your organization and your school make the most of 2018. And I know the association works hard to do that every day in every way, so I think we're going to be very consistent with that in we talk. We want to also remind you of opportunities to connect with us in a variety of social media platforms, as you see listed on the screen. And also, we have a hashtag for today's session, and that hashtag remains Crisis Coach. When we think about all of these things, we have attorneys like everybody else, and they want us to have a disclaimer that you must have the oral comment to understand what's going on. Any work product that we share with you, you should check with your organization's counsel and local and national authorities. And finally, that today is not legal advice or legal opinion. I'm an engineer, and I think I'm probably the last one you really are looking for legal advice today from. Firestorm transforms crisis into value, and we'll talk about that specifically today as a part of what we're going to do. And we're empowering you to manage crisis and risk. And that's going to be very appropriate. If you saw the December webinar when we talked and reviewed the crises from 2017, today we're going to be focused on solutions. Our expertise is in crisis management, critical decision support, crisis communications, crisis public relations, and consequence management. We are America's crisis coach. So the Virginia Association of Independent Schools is a large and prominent organization in your state. Certainly the information they share is absolutely critical, and we're excited about the relationship that we've had now that spanned several years together. And our moderators today are Kim and Ken. Kim, what would you like to say for the association today?
Well, as always, I like to say that we appreciate and are very grateful for the continued support of Firestorm for our independent schools. We have 95 independent schools across the state, and all of different sizes and shapes and needs, and we're just grateful to have you there supporting our schools as always in their attempt to be risk managed and conflict free, but we know that doesn't always happen, so it's always nice to have that safety net of Firestorm with us.
Well, thank you, and we appreciate that, and we appreciate the relationship. Ken, do you want to add anything specifically before we get started?
Yes, good morning. Thank you all for joining us today. Just to talk a little bit about Safety Net, we are available 24/7. So if you have a crisis, if you're in trouble, we're a phone call away, and that first hour is complimentary due to the relationship that we have with the Virginia Association of Independent Schools. So thank you very much, and I will be the one following up with you after this webinar today with a phone call or an email. So thank you very much. I look forward to talking to you.
And in the meantime, if you need us, just reach out and we'll be there too. So thanks, Ken. Thanks, Kim. And today it's going to be a little different format because we're going to be focusing on solutions specifically and access to additional things that you can get for your school. Wanted to give you a quick update on Firestorm. Our parent company is Novum. As you know, we were acquired January last year, so it's right at a year ago. And just this week, Novum got uplisted to go on the NASDAQ. So we're all excited about that, as you can imagine, and what that means. And what we really want to do is talk about what we referenced in December, what we learned and saw in the crises that were impacting, and what we immediately see happening. And it's in a crisis, people fall into that trap of trying to perform without going through the necessary predict and plan stages. And so those make mistakes. And what we're going to try to do is to give you some insights and think about some things in a different way than you've thought about them before. You're going to hear us talk about first person, first hour, and your finest hour. And I think if we blend those together, that'll start to give you a foundation to make sure that your heads of school, that your teachers, your parents are all on the same page at the same time as we work through each of those areas. So as we think about that, it comes up, and we have a quote from Winston Churchill. I just over the Christmas holiday and break was able to see the movie The Darkest Hour, and was very impressed by that. And if you like historically based movies, I think you'll find it well worth your time. And in it, the movie relates to the first 3 to 4 weeks of Winston Churchill's promotion to becoming Prime Minister of Great Britain. And if you will remember your history books, and I know we have teachers here that teach history on a regular basis, it's the chaos that was going on. Hitler had blown through Europe. The British Army, 300,000 were trapped at Dunkirk, another 4,000 in Calais. It appeared that the imminent invasion of Great Britain would occur, and there was chaos in terms of what the vision was and what to do. And clearly, if there was ever a crisis, this was at a great point of crisis. Now, Winston Churchill, when he was appointed Prime Minister, he was not the favored candidate. He was the compromise candidate, the one that they thought they could manipulate and control, and was not viewed positively at this point. Clearly, the decisions that he made and the actions that he took and the words that he said made a difference through the year, and our vision of him is founded on and anchored in all of those things. And truly, he made a difference at a time when it came down to that first person, to one person who could do it. The quote you see here on the screen, he used versions of this, I think, some 18 different times. One of the times he was in the shelters and they were being bombed, and he said that in the history of Great Britain, this would be their finest hour. But if you look at this quote here, I think it directs us to the theme and the tone that we want to set for 2018. I'm going to read it and then comment on it. To each, there comes in their lifetime a special moment when they are figuratively tapped on the shoulder and offered the chance to do a very special thing, unique to them and fitted to their talents. What a tragedy if that moment finds them unprepared or unqualified for that which could have been their finest hour. If you think of that and the challenge that those words bring to each of us, if there's a tragedy that's occurring to our school, if there is a crisis that's occurring, and we're seeing in America today where violence is more common, where those issues are emerging that are significant to us, that we must be prepared to handle. That challenge becomes extremely important for us to make sure that we're prepared, that we have qualified people, and that it will be our finest hour. Unfortunately, violence in schools happens. We know that there are over 2 million episodes of bullying annually in our schools. We know that there are behaviors of concern, violence, sexual molestation, attacks, suicide, drugs, substance abuse. All of those elements are there. So clearly, we're in an environment today that's different than any of the others that we've had. Now, in the slide just before, I talked about Firestorm and the upgrade to NASDAQ. I'll also share with you that we did 2 acquisitions in Firestorm in 2017 and the first day of 2018. At the end of the year, on December the 31st, BC Management, that's Business Continuity Management, which is a staffing firm, joined Firestorm and became a part of us. They also provide project people. If you need assistance in developing plans, they have those, but they also have the ability to do benchmarking and metrics and to let you know where your plans are relative to standards and best practices. Coupled with that, a day later on January 1st, Secure Education Consultants, a firm made up of retired Secret Service officers, joined Firestorm. And so the ability to have the level of security that the White House has now is available economically to you in your school. So our resources have gone up and our capabilities certainly have been reinforced so that we can help you prepare, that we can assure that you're qualified, and that it will in fact be the defining hour for your school in those situations. So if we think about it, we look to first persons. There's a news story. It's what did you know? When did you know it? What do you think about that? Tell us the story, because we want the urgency and the insight of the person that's there. That's their point of view. They have a unique vision as a result in those events. So that led us to a whole series of thoughts to think about the first person, the first hour, and the finest hour to frame the solutions that you really need to make sure are in place for your school in 2018. We talked last month about all the things that could happen. Now let's shift that focus over to think about what are we going to do. So let's apply that to a crisis. Let's think about that first person. The overwhelming comment is that a crisis isn't business as usual, isn't school as usual. It's business as unusual. It's completely different. And so in this crisis, what you must look at is what are you going to decide, what are you going to do, and what are you going to say? Now, I'll come back to that in a minute. But look at the first part of that question. In a crisis, what is it that you want the first person to do? So that first person here becomes extremely important. Are we going to put the school on lockdown or lockout, evacuation, shelter in place? Are we going to be notifying 911 and getting the police response? How do we coordinate that? And we'll talk about the types of communications before we finish today. But thinking about this is the first person becomes extremely important. I read a story today out of Florida related to the nightclub shootings that occurred a little over a year ago. And in the story, the shooter's wife said she knew something was up. She saw something that gave her concern and hoped that it wouldn't happen. And then it turned into killing 49 people and injuring dozens and dozens more. So the first person who knows about the crisis has a specific set of responsibilities. Have you taken the time to look at your plan, to look at your emergency response plan, your incident plan, your crisis management plan, the training that you're doing for your people, the notification messages that need to go out, and define those specific set of responsibilities so that people won't have to think. They're going to know what it is that they're to do. This becomes the foundation by which we're going. So if you break your plans down to think about the first person who observes that behavior of concern, the anonymous reporting, following the behavioral risk threat assessment program that you can have within your school so that you can respond before those behaviors escalate to violence becomes very important. Also, that first person, the moment they see this occurring, the alert, getting the word out. What are the words you're going to use? How are you going to communicate that? That will make a significant difference in terms of the outcome. We ask many times in these types of sessions, how do you know and are you sure? If you're not absolutely sure who this first person is, if you're not absolutely sure that they know what they'll have to decide, what they'll have to do, and what they'll have to say, then your plan won't work. Going back to Winston Churchill, he was faced with bad choices. And we tell everyone in every crisis, that's what you're going to have. It's not that there's one good choice and one bad choice. It is a selection between two bad choices. He was faced with 300,000 men trapped in Dunkirk, 4,000 men trapped in Calais, and he sent the message to the general in Calais that they were to aggressively engage the enemy and have the enemy bring the fight to them, and that there would be no evacuation. That was a death sentence for those 4,000 people. Those men gave their lives that there was a chance that the 300,000 could be rescued. And as we know, they were. So as you look at these things, this first person, preparing someone for the decisions, preparing someone for the actions, preparing someone for the words, will make a real difference. So as we move from that, in the crisis, who is the first person you will look to? Let's make that list. Let's look at and start to train them and talk about the types of things that you want them to do in each of those areas. If you don't know who the first person is and who is the backup for this person, if they're not available, is it your coach? Is it your dean of students? Is it your athletic director? Is it the academic dean? Is it a facilities person? And then what roles do they each play as we focus on that? So very simply, you can do an audit on your own program right now. Think about the first person if there's a weather event. Think about the first person if there's a violence event. Think about the first person if there's a cyber security or information event. Looking for the first person and planning that out, training, testing, and preparing them will become absolutely critical. So now we've selected the first person. We're going to tell you now it's the first hour that's going to determine, does this crisis stabilize or does it escalate? Now, we've talked a lot about these types of things and how you compare one crisis to another. Firestorm has developed a crisis index program that we'll talk about again this year. And it involves looking at, is there outrage, is there fault, and is there fear? That all helps us to determine what we should, the decisions, the actions, and the words. And it further helps us to determine, is this crisis escalating or is it stabilizing? Are we at a point where we're getting better in this situation, or is it getting worse associated with it? So if you want to break it down and you want to make this very simple, and simple in these areas makes a big difference because the results will be much more predictable and repeatable in focusing on it. So in the first hour, what are the decisions that you must make? Because those decisions will determine everything else. Simple decisions about evacuation or sheltering in place, that's a fundamental. You can stay or go. Those are decisions that have to be made. Lockdown, lockout, alerting first responders, identifying the decision about, wait a minute, I've seen this behavior and I think that student is at risk or on a path of violence or maybe contemplating suicide or some other aspect. Making those decisions and having a system in place to make sure that you make the same decision the same way every time. Because if we miss that decision and that behavior goes unrecognized, then that student remains on a path to violence, and we have seen all too often the outcomes from those events. Secondly, the actions you take. We've got the decisions, and then we have to take action. And as the example that we gave with Churchill, he literally had life and death decisions that he had to make. So there's an opportunity here for us to find a way to make a difference and take those actions and implement them, because we don't have the luxury of time here. Particularly if we're dealing with a weather event or a violence event, we have to take those actions quickly to protect our students. And finally, the words that you say, those words matter. And that makes sure that there's clarity of action. We see many times there's confusion on what needs to be done, or in some cases, schools have said, well, we don't want to alarm people unnecessarily, so they do things and develop other words, using colors for an action. You know, we're going to have a code orange. Well, what does that mean? And people don't know. Or they try to be clever and say, we're going to do a Colts stampede to represent an evacuation. You want clarity in your messages and your words, and they become much more impactful. And so knowing what you can say, what you cannot say, how to say it will make a difference. So if we focus on the first person, and we focus on the first hour, particularly at these three things: what are the decisions we need to make, what are the actions we need to take, and the words we need to say, that will determine if it in fact becomes our finest hour. I would encourage you to try to shrink your plan down. We're not looking to have big, thick binders with page after page of information. We want to have specific things. What are the decisions that we're going to need to make right now? What are the actions that we could take? And then what are the words? Those will make a difference. There's a scene in the movie where when the opposition to Winston Churchill were struggling and trying to determine how they could stop him from taking the nation to war, they suddenly lost the vote. Everybody supported Winston Churchill, and he was able to grab the moment and save the country. And the two people that were leading the opposition against him, one turned to the other and said, well, what just happened? And the other said, Winston brought words to war. And when you think about this, these words will frame how your parents react, how your teachers react, how your students react in each of these areas. So this becomes an important measurement. First person, first hour. Now let's go, is it your finest hour? Now we've shared this with you before. This is the Firestorm crisis maturity model. So as you're having a test, have your grading sheet to be able to see, did my students do well? Did they not do well? Did they handle it? Well, this would be how we would score your ability to respond in a crisis. And you'll notice, and we pointed out before, we're looking at your decision process, your roles and responsibilities, your information clarity, your speed of decision making, and finally your communications effectiveness. And the goal is ultimately to move from the left side of that form to the right side, moving from where everything is a surprise and it's a liability, ultimately where it becomes a part of the culture of your school and becomes strategic. And so the descriptive terms are a way for you to evaluate how you did in a test exercise or how you performed in an actual crisis. So it's important to take a look at this and focus on it. Along the bottom, you'll see that as you go from one stage to the next, those become breakthroughs. The first breakthrough level is becoming a control. You're in more control if you're at least at that stage 2 level. If you get to a stage 3 where it's supportive and it's pre-action oriented, it's an alignment. You're getting everything aligned as it would need to be. But finally, as you get to the top, that's a value breakthrough. The value comes through within your organization and what you accomplish. The more you test, the more exercises you do, the better you will get at doing crisis management and making these decisions. The first time you come together shouldn't be in a crisis. So as we think about this, we then stopped and said, okay, how can we help? How can we best help and make this happen? And so we looked at helping your first person. Not everybody needs to know everything, but how do those things come together? And we are focused on solutions this year. And I'm going to give you a quick look behind the scenes at how Firestorm is set up. So if that will help you in a particular area, you'll know what to ask for and where to go for help. And we provide these solutions before, during, and after a crisis. We're here when you need us. And as you think about those solutions, they really go from one end to the other. We'll start in the risk assessment area, we'll do it in the training, we'll do it in the exercises, the writing of the plans, all of the elements, and then supporting you in the crisis itself and helping you to evaluate it. So what we did was we took our services and put them into that knot that you saw that's come up in the center of your screen and put them into 6 different verticals: crisis and risk solutions, people solutions, security solutions, professional services, intelligence solutions, and analytical solutions. If we didn't do anything else but in the webinar right here, I would ask you to think about your plans, think about your school, and say, do we know how we're going to handle risk within our school? Are we prepared to manage a crisis? Do we have the right people? Have they got the information that they need? Have we vetted them to know we've got the right people? And how do we train our people to be ready? Now, security is a whole separate standalone area. Unfortunately, when you have care, custody, and control, security becomes a driving force within your school. Have you had a formal physical security assessment at your school? Have you put certain things to control access? Because when we think about security, it's access, it's awareness, and it's actions. Professional services, what can you do? What else do you need to have someone help you with? Intelligence systems, real-time, predictive, and protective intelligence to be able to identify who is at risk and what are we doing to help in there, and how do my plans and my people compare to others in the benchmarking. And then finally, the analytical solutions, as we've talked about. What are the data? What is it's telling us, and how do we know? So that's how we've aligned to provide you solutions and services in each of these areas. I'm going to touch them quickly, and then we're going to come to a conclusion today. So let me just go into each one of these a little bit more. So if we think about crisis and risk solutions, we follow a predict, plan, perform methodology. Predict what the vulnerabilities and threats are, what are their impacts, how do we monitor them, what are the triggers, what are your plans, and then how are your people trained, how are they tested, and to make sure that you're available. On our website, you can go and read lots of information around providing those areas. We are America's Crisis Coach. We're named by dozens of insurance companies to be that firm that would respond and to help and deliver those real-time crisis solutions. It's not something you can wait till next week or next month for. If you look along the bottom of the page, whether it's emergency response, incident management, crisis management, those are 3 levels of response associated with it. Emergency is what do your people need to do, how are you managing that incident, and how is senior leadership dealing with the strategic aspects of it. I mentioned the crisis index, how you compare one crisis to another, having available to you 24/7 real-time response, and we do that for the Virginia Association of Independent Schools through our Crisis Stop program, so that critical first hour of support you get at no cost. And then training and exercises. People solutions, permanent staffing, temporary staffing, somebody's leaving, somebody's coming in, how do you solve that? And interim staffing and coming together. So with our addition of BC management into Firestorm, we have expanded our expert council, our coaching capabilities, how we mentor and help your people grow to be able to prepare to that. And then look at virtual staffing. We can provide people for you so that you don't have to make a commitment to an individual to have them on full-time return. And as we go to the next area to talk about security, Firestorm is prepared to provide you a virtual chief security officer for your school. By the way, we can do that in the areas of information security, cybersecurity, and other areas, but we can provide you those people and identify how we can help your people grow to a new level. Under security, we do consulting, training, and education. We certainly do the physical assessments on site. Looking at those physical security assessments, where are the access points? What are the awareness, the cameras, the detectors that would be in place? Having them put into place. Bertha, the Behavioral Risk Threat Assessment Program, how do you identify those behaviors of concern before they escalate to violence? How do you intervene? How do you put a program in place to support and do those areas? And many times, if you're doing a renovation or building a new school, the security can be built into the architectural plans, and we work directly with your architects to provide that security information on the right way to build your school. And if you need a chief security officer, we're prepared to do that and give you a virtual chief security officer that's available to you 24/7. We do active shooter and violence assessments and training related to those topics. We even have a certification program in those areas to make sure that your people are certified and repeated annually as you continue to grow and move. Professional services, you'll see assess, address, and act, and that really brings us into critical decision support, all types of plans, security plans, the behavioral risk threat assessment, continuity of operations, communicable illness, crisis management, how those are dealt with within your school, and then the response, the training, and preparing you with crisis communications plan and the messages. We can give you assessments, we can give you tools, we can give you templates to do that. We can do turnkey custom planning to support you. Intelligence solutions is an area that we find universally that schools have lagged in. They don't look at the information that's available on an open source basis so that they can see that student is at risk. And that information becomes absolutely critical for you to know. So we can set up a risk profile. We can have alerts that come to you when those things are starting to happen. Preparing and looking at language threats with semantics, context, and syntax. Real-time threat identification. We've been able to identify someone that is on a direct path to violence so that you can intervene before those things happen. So we can map that escalation and carry you into those areas. Analytical solutions. This is the benchmarking, the program comparison. How do we look relative to others? What are standards and best practices in our site? The insurance industry, as you know, the founders of Firestorm, we all came out of the insurance and reinsurance industry. Look at us to provide metrics, and we are working on a new program to be able to show you where your people are, where your assets and equipment and supplies are, how they dealt with geographically, how you interface in with first responders in that, and then looking at the industry reports around it so that you can measure and understand. Your school can have an assessment of your current plans done, pointing out the strengths and the weaknesses at no charge. That's a benefit that the Virginia Association of Independent Schools has made available to you as from Firestorm as part of our ongoing relationship. So we went through a whole bunch of things here, and I want to slow it down just to talk about the methodology again that we use and point out a couple of high points, and then we'll give you some things that you can do right now. When you're thinking about communications, we want you to focus on why you're communicating. The reason to emphasize that, we've talked about earlier, it's the decisions you make, the actions you take, and the words you say. This will determine how your parents, how your students, how your teachers respond to you in this crisis. The first type of communications in any crisis that you're always going to make, it's the coordination. What do you want them to do? Shelter in place, lockdown, lockout, evacuate. What do you want your parents to do? How do these things come? So those communications should be pre-written and ready to go so that you have clarity of operation. The second is about the crisis. The crisis itself, it's more brand and reputational impacts, and we will tell you that can wait at least 24 hours. Where we've seen schools make mistakes as they rush to try to get that brand message out when they don't know all the facts, or the facts are fluid and changing. So those are things to prepare in advance. You've heard us talk about home bases and message maps. They go directly to that. The last type of crisis communication is compliance. You are mandated reporters. If you know that a child is at risk, if they're in danger, whether it's domestic violence at home or at the school or in any other way, you must report that. You are regulated and required. There are other types of compliance communications around cyber and cyber breach and notifying people that there's been a problem with their identity. And schools are now being targeted, particularly by cyber criminals, and going after the information in your database. So predict, plan, perform. That's the methodology. It's simple to say. But if you go back and look at your plans, you can do your first benchmarking. You can do your first evaluation and then come to us and we can help you fill in the gaps. Under the predict, what are the vulnerabilities and threats that are likely to occur? How do you rank them? How do you measure their impacts on each individual areas? Firestorm has developed a unique way that allows you to standardize that so that you can compare that year over year within it. But in the prediction area, for every threat that you've identified, you then need to know what's the impact if that threat were to occur. How do we monitor for that threat? Who does the monitoring? And what is the trigger to activate our plan? And finally, when we think about all of those things, if the threats that we know happen, what are the decisions that we will need to make? What are the actions that we need to take? And finally, what are the words that we will need to say? So it all comes back to this predict foundation. Doesn't jump and start and perform. It's back at predict. Under the plan, now that we know what we're facing, then we can work through the details of the plans. And every plan is written for a target audience. Your plans associated with your students will be geared toward them. For your leadership team that's helping to deal with the incident, or your reunification plan, if there's been a disaster or an event that happens, how do we get parents and students back together again, particularly in an environment where we've dealt with casualties? And then beyond those things, thinking about how we're going to perform, the training, the exercises, the crisis management, the supplies, the materials. So you can evaluate your plan, or the assessment that we will do for you at no cost will help you better see where we need to put our emphasis. Well, we started today talking about Winston Churchill, and the quote rang true to me, and the movie really rang true to me as I sat there and watched it. But think of this tragedy. How do we explain to a parent, we could have saved your child, but we weren't prepared? We could have saved your child, but we weren't qualified. At the time and the hour and the moment that they needed us, we weren't ready. It was not our finest hour, it was our worst hour. You've heard me share with you that regularly when I'm talking with a live audience, I'll ask them about what their state flower is. And sometimes people know, sometimes they don't. I'm in Georgia. I can tell you that the state flower for the state of Georgia is the Cherokee Rose. And then I'll ask the audience a question about, well, let's pick another state. Colorado. Do you know the state flower for Colorado? And sometimes now, I guess about 1 in 10 times, somebody will make a joke and say marijuana, and it gets a good laugh from the audience, and they may be true. But the state flower for Colorado is columbine. Think about how sobering that is. A flower is not perceived by most as the state flower, but an act of school violence. What will happen in this area will define you and your students and their parents for the rest of their life. So it's our commitment to you that we want to help you that in every one of these situations, it will truly be your finest hour. So what's next? What are we looking to do? You can download a brief based upon today's webinar. You can go back and watch it again, or you can have others within your school view it, and you have access to other Firestorm services and resources. There's a digital newsletter that comes out each week. There are these webinars and others, and then there are quarterly exercises. Secondly, I would encourage you to assess your plan. We're waiving the $1,500 fee for that assessment, and it will also give you a much increased clarity of where you need to invest your time to get your plans in place. You have available today Crisis Stop. You can pick up the phone, call us on our 800 number. It's right on our website. If you find yourself in a crisis, we'll help you stabilize the events, trigger the resources, opine on the consequences, and prevent you from making the common mistakes. Let's start this relationship now and not at that moment of crisis. If it is a crisis, don't hesitate to call. And then lastly, register for the next webinar session. It's a time that you can sign up and get that newsletter. That'll keep you aware of new events and things that are coming along. So I want to say thank you to Kim and the Virginia Association of Independent Schools and all that we have had together. And we appreciate this relationship, and we appreciate the commitment that they bring to you within your school. If you've got questions, you can contact us at firestorm.com. You can send us an email at webinars@firestorm.com, or you can call us at 800-321-2219. By the way, if you're in crisis and you call that number, it's staffed at our crisis center 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Make sure you tell us immediately that you're in crisis so we can provide you that level of support. May 2018 be all that it can be. May your plans be there. May you know what to do, and that first person makes the right decision, takes the right actions, and uses the right words. At that point, we have an excellent chance that this will be your finest hour, the finest hour for your school, for your students, and for your parents. Thank you for your services and helping our students to grow morally, ethically, physically, and academically in each area. You're helping them to grow at a rapid rate. You are truly making a difference and responding to that calling each and every day. So have a great 2018. Happy January. I hope the weather in Virginia takes a turn for the better. I know we've had a recent surge of storms and cold weather coming through, so I hope that the rest of the quarter goes well. Talk to you later in our webinars next month. So this is Jim Satterfield from Firestorm. Have a great day. Goodbye.